I remember the first time I felt myself shrinking in a room, not physically but in a way that settled deeper, crackling inside my bones. It wasn't a sudden awareness. It was subtle, a whisper behind the noise of conversations and the hum of daily life. I'd catch myself crossing my arms tightly, pulling my shoulders in, trying to make less space. Not just to avoid attention, but because it almost felt necessary, a survival tactic I'd unknowingly learned. The more I noticed it, the more it became clear that this wasn't just about being shy or cautious. It was something embedded in how my body chose to move and breathe, how it took up space, or more accurately, how it surrendered space to everything and everyone else. That sense of pulling back wasn't just about presence. It was about energy, something I naively thought was constant but that my body told me otherwise. I've seen men who, with the same routine, the same diet, years, and health, carry entirely different energies. One moves through a room like he owns it, steady and grounded, as if his body is a fortress. The other, equally capable in many ways, drifts around edges and shadows, barely making a ripple. I couldn't help asking myself why. What explained that difference in vitality, in boldness, in how a man literally occupies his world? It wasn't just psychological, a thought I tried to dismiss initially. There was something biological, something deeper than just mindset or attitude. The body remembers. It adjusts, literally rewires itself based on how we navigate space daily. When we habitually shrink, fold in, and avoid creating distance around us, it answers back by tightening posture, shallowing breath, and coiling tension where there once was openness. Over time, this translates not just into low energy but a profound sense of invisibility, even exhaustion. The hardest part was realizing these weren't small, fixable quirks but patterns ingrained into the very fabric of me. I recall a particular afternoon in a crowded cafe where it all crystallized. I was with a friend, a man who, from the moment he walked in, seemed to anchor the entire space. Heads subtly turned, conversations adjusted, and yet he wasn't boisterous or forceful. He just occupied the room with what felt like effortless certainty. Meanwhile, I was there, keenly aware of shrinking away from the table's edge, avoiding expanding my legs or making eye contact that lasted more than polite seconds. Watching him, I sensed something extraordinary. His body was saying to the world, "This is my place." In contrast, mine was whispering apologies for taking up too much room, as if every inch I claimed was a request rather than a right. That moment left me unsettled, but it also sparked a quiet rebellion inside. What if I didn't have to keep making myself smaller? What if the tired, numbing heaviness I carried from years of retreating wasn't a sign of weakness but a signal that my body was begging for a shift? The idea that my energy, my very presence, could be recalibrated through something as elemental as space felt revolutionary. It reframed everything I thought I knew about strength and vitality. But here's the thing, living on the edges, blending in too hard, or avoiding any chance of standing out doesn't just make us invisible socially. It has a cost that runs deep. It seeps into the way our bodies breathe, how our muscles hold tension, how stable or shaky our stance becomes. It's not just mental fatigue, it's biological wear. The irony is brutal. We think making ourselves smaller, quieter, less demanding is safe, but instead, it drains us. We lose the very energy we need to engage and thrive. I want you to imagine that feeling, carrying a fatigue so profound it clouds your senses and dims your confidence. It's not laziness or lack of willpower, but your body signaling it's been shrinking too long, giving less space to itself than it deserves. What if you could begin noticing those moments you unconsciously fold in? The times you back down, whisper where you should speak loud, or shrink where you should settle firm. Recognizing that is the first step not toward changing who you are but toward reclaiming the space your body has been silently asking for. As I walked away that day, observing not just my friend but myself and the crowd around us, something clicked inside me. Living life in the background, out of fear of conflict or discomfort, isn't some neutral act. It's a biological message my body interprets as low investment, a lack of commitment to show up fully. And that message costs energy. It steals stability and steals the sense of being visible and real. This is where my journey, and perhaps yours, begins not in rushing to fix or overpower, but in opening to the powerful possibility that where and how we occupy space shapes the very fuel we run on. It's an awakening to the dance between body and place, energy and presence. Here, in the silence between crowded moments or the tightness of a folding shoulder, lies a story of reclaiming. Not by changing the core of who I am, but by learning to take the space I already deserve without apology. I remember a moment that forever altered how I saw the energy trapped within our bodies. A chilly autumn evening when I found myself standing on a crowded subway platform. The press of bodies was intense, but what struck me was how some men seemed to expand effortlessly, shoulders wide, chest open, commanding their patch of ground with quiet authority. Others, though equally tall and healthy, huddled as if the air itself was an adversary, their spines curved, heads down, as if trying to disappear beneath their jackets. I realized then that this wasn't merely about confidence. It was as if their bodies carried an invisible map, constantly calculating how much room to claim or surrender. In one unexpected twist, I observed how a man across from me adjusted his stance almost imperceptibly, lengthening his neck, straightening his back, and the change transformed not only his posture but the energy radiating from him. It was as if invoking this subtle physical expansion rewired his internal state. I felt a magnetic pull. My body stiffened, craving that same grounded presence. What fascinated me was how this recalibration wasn't reserved for grand gestures but resided in the minutiae of our physical habits, whether in the curve of a shoulder or the steadiness of a gaze. This experience illuminated a more intricate reality. Our nervous system's response to spatial occupation is continuous and adaptive. When the body diminishes its claim on the environment, it triggers a cascade of physiological changes, reducing electrical activity in muscles, dampening sympathetic nervous responses that fuel alertness, and lowering overall vitality. Conversely, even modest shifts that suggest increased assertiveness provoke enhanced neural firing patterns that boost energy and focus. The body isn't passive. It negotiates with the world, upgrading or downgrading our internal chemistry based on whether it perceives us as retracting or thriving. Now, consider how this dynamic unfolds within social hierarchies, unseen yet visceral. I recall a corporate meeting I attended, where a confident executive took deliberate strides to occupy space. His chair angled openly, legs uncrossed, arms resting expansively. In direct contrast, a younger colleague slouched, inhabiting the corner of the room, hesitating before speaking. The difference wasn't simply how they behaved externally. It radiated through their very aura. The younger man's quiet withdrawal subtly sent a signal throughout the room that undermined his influence before his words even emerged. I was taken aback by how much control body language exerted on perception and, consequently, on one's energetic reserves. Another layer to this story unfolded months later during a hiking trip. We stopped for a break on a narrow trail, and I noticed a friend purposely placed himself on the sunniest rock, legs sprawled, chest open to the breeze. "Claim this spot," he said with a grin. "It feels like recharging a battery." The simplicity of his act, a small but deliberate physical assertion of space, revealed an unspoken truth. Our physiology thrives on gestures that signal ownership and presence. It's a primal code that prompts the body to release tension, deepen breathing, and awaken dormant strength. This reinforced my belief that maintaining energetic presence requires more than mental resolve. It demands embodied rituals that reclaim physical ground. I once tried to test this firsthand during a stressful day when exhaustion gnawed at me. Instead of succumbing to habitual curling inward, I consciously lengthened my spine every few minutes, lifting my sternum as if pulling an invisible thread upward, relaxing the jaw, expanding my rib cage. The effect surprised me profoundly. My fatigue lessened, and my mind sharpened as though my body had accepted a renewed invitation to energize itself. That small act transformed my experience, not through willpower alone but by harnessing a profound dialogue between movement and vitality. It becomes clear that the body's spatial relationship is a dance of balance. Too much contraction leads to stagnation, yet reckless expansion without alignment breeds tension and inefficiency. What I have learned is that cultivating subtle awareness of how I position myself during everyday moments. Standing in line, entering a room, speaking to a group, translates into lasting energetic shifts. These tiny recalibrations accumulate, gradually unlocking reservoirs of stamina and self-assurance. Imagine confronting moments that typically trigger withdrawal, crowded social settings, confrontations, or public speaking. Now picture interweaving micro-movements that counteract instinctual shrinking. Setting feet solidly beneath you, aligning your shoulders, drawing breath intentionally into your torso. This quiet rebellion against internal limitations initiates a cascade of neurobiological shifts, reprogramming your sense of belonging and authority. I can't overstate how these embodied gestures not only influence external impressions, but also sculpt a new internal reality, bolstering resilience and presence. I invite you to observe the unique ways you might hesitate to fill your surroundings. What habits anchor your tendency to retreat? Maybe it's the crossing of arms, the drooping of eyelids, or the minimal gesturing when you speak. Becoming fluent in your body's spatial language offers a powerful opportunity. You don't need to overhaul your identity. You can gently steer your posture and movement toward fuller expression. This nuanced practice rebuilds an internal alliance, a steady pulse of energy that permeates your actions. Ultimately, learning to occupy space authentically resonates as a deeper form of self-respect. It whispers to the nervous system that you are worthy, stable, and untouchable. This isn't about imposing dominance, but embracing a balanced sovereignty grounded in openness and presence. I've discovered that this subtle yet profound internal conversation shapes the quality of my days and relationships, infusing every moment with a renewed sense of vitality and connection. One afternoon, I found myself at a bustling farmer's market, surrounded by a swirl of conversations, colors, and aromas. While most moved fluidly through the maze of stalls, I noticed a man near the entrance. Tall, confident, his posture radiating assurance. He didn't push or jostle but claimed his ground with a steady gaze and deliberate movements. In contrast, nearby, a woman lingered at the edge of a booth, shoulders rounded inward, eyes fixed on her phone, avoiding eye contact, as though shrinking to avoid interference. Witnessing these contrasting energies, I was struck by how physical momentum intertwines with intention, shaping the rhythm of engagement. Later that day, I reflected on how motion informs energy beyond fixed postures. It's one thing to stand rooted. It's another to move through space with an expanding sense of presence. I began practicing walking deliberately but with a fuller range, letting my steps lengthen gently, allowing my chest to lift without strain, releasing tension from my jaw. With each stride, I sensed a subtle shift in my internal tempo, as if my nervous system was waking from a fog. The simple act of changing gait created a ripple effect, realigning how I felt mentally and emotionally. This kinetic awareness revealed a dimension often overlooked, how the flow of our movement patterns silently communicates our investment in our surroundings and self. There's a memory I hold sharply tied to this discovery. During a family gathering, I realized I habitually retreated into a corner, folding into myself just to avoid disrupting the ebb and flow of conversation. I felt like a shadow, wanting to fade rather than infuse the room. One evening, after silently observing this habit for weeks, I decided to test a small reversal. At dinner, instead of pulling my chair tightly against the table, I positioned it slightly back, allowing space that wasn't cramped or apologetic. I unfolded my arms and positioned my feet flat on the floor, sending an almost invisible message to my own nervous system. I'm here comfortably, no excuses. Suddenly, the energy in that space felt different. The people around me noticed, too. A cousin asked thoughtfully, "You seem more relaxed tonight." It wasn't magic, but a conscious shift in how I negotiated my own boundaries. On another occasion, while negotiating a challenging conversation at work, I felt a familiar tightening inside. Tempers flaring, stakes high. Rather than folding away from the tension, I found myself inhaling more deeply, deliberately slowing my speech and widening the space my voice inhabited. Though the conversation was tough, this subtle fullness of expression softened the dynamic. I wasn't dominating, but I wasn't ceding ground either. It felt like anchoring myself, casting out a stabilizing net between conflicting currents. Afterwards, walking to my desk, I noticed a surge of calm resilience replace the usual drain. This taught me something invaluable. Our communicative energy, how much room our voice and silence take, profoundly alters the internal ebb and flow. Thinking back to childhood, I remembered moments on a playground when a mentor taught me about the power of visualizing the distance my arms could reach. Imagine you're filling the whole space, he'd say, encouraging wide gestures that breathed life into the air around me. Those exercises weren't about grandiosity, but about claiming a healthy spatial relationship with the environment. I realize now those practices planted seeds, hinting at a primal connection between spatial imagination and vitality. Re-engaging with those early lessons as an adult allowed me to revisit and expand my engagement with my own energetic field, weaving movement, breath, and spatial dialogue together. One evening, walking beneath the glow of streetlights, I caught myself hesitating before entering a crowded cafe. The urge to blend into the background was powerful, but I consciously straightened my shoulders and slowed my pace. I visualized extending an invisible aura, like a gentle ripple radiating outward. The sensation was unfamiliar but invigorating, a mix of vulnerability and strength. Inside, I spoke louder and more clearly than usual, matched my tone with steady eye contact, and consciously allowed my gestures to fill more room between myself and the table. The responses were immediate. Smiles, nods of engagement, and a buoyant feeling within that lasted well after I left. This moment etched itself into my understanding of how reclaiming energetic volume isn't about aggression but about authentic invitation. Now, consider how this applies when you face situations that typically trigger withdrawal, maybe crowded events, moments of criticism, or being overlooked in teams. What physical habits surface unconsciously? Constricted breathing, tightened fists, a slouched frame. Experiment with reversing these impulses by expanding selectively. Grow your inhalation, soften your jaw, ground your feet. Pay attention to the psychological shifts that follow. For me, this form of embodied experimentation became a gateway, a living laboratory in which I uncovered latent wells of endurance and self-assurance. There's an unspoken language underlying our interactions, composed of these spatial negotiations, and mastering it yields more than social ease. It rekindles a deep reservoir of vitality. Harnessing this command over movement and expression turned into a daily practice, a dance between pushing outward and retreating inward with intention. As I embraced this balance, a powerful transformation unfolded not only in how I appeared but in the subtle energy I cultivated within, becoming more not through force but through calibrated expansion. There was once a moment I still recall vividly, sitting in a cafe with an old friend who never held back. He had this uncanny way of filling every bit of the environment around him without seeming forced or performative. As we talked, I noticed how he would gesture broadly with his hands, lean forward when sharing stories, and maintain eye contact that felt unwavering yet kind. I, on the other hand, found myself shrinking into the chair, fingers clenched loosely on the table, careful not to loom or interrupt. His energy created a magnetic pull. Mine barely grazed the air. What struck me most was how his physical engagement wasn't mere charisma or volume but a deep, physical dialogue with the space we shared. His posture wasn't static. It flowed like live wire, sometimes stretching, other times contracting thoughtfully, always communicating investment. In contrast, my habitual hesitation molded my movements into half-steps and guarded gestures, which translated into a subtle withdrawal from interaction. It was as if I had been rehearsing a script written by uncertainty, one where I never claimed the room with full intent. Not long after, I embarked on a curious experiment in daily life. Instead of letting my motions conform to habitual restraint, I consciously contested the urge to retreat by increasing my physical footprint in small ways. I began by embracing silence rather than rushing to fill conversational gaps, noticing how pausing expanded my influence rather than diminished it. I slowly allowed my arms to rest openly, sometimes draping casually over chair backs, other times reaching toward objects instead of clutching them defensively. These gestures might seem trivial, yet over days they rewired how others perceived me and, crucially, how I felt internally. On one chilly morning, while waiting at a train station, I deliberately shifted my stance. Feet planted shoulder-width apart, shoulders relaxed but broad, chin lifted to catch the light. The crisp air seemed to press against me less that day. Strangers walked by with their eyes briefly catching mine as if drawn to a signal I had never consciously sent before. One woman smiled warmly without reason, and a teenager nodded with unmistakable respect. The realization dawned that subtle, intentional physical cues construct a powerful language that transcends words, affecting relationships and personal energy alike. In a different setting, I found myself negotiating a difficult conversation with a colleague who often dominated discussions with sharp words and brisk motions. Instead of matching intensity or shrinking under pressure, I chose a radically different approach. I spoke deliberately and evenly, using measured hand movements that referenced the space between us rather than closing it. Each phrase emerged calmly, grounding my presence without needing to raise my voice. To my surprise, this shift dismantled much of the tension. The other person's posture softened. Questions became curious rather than confrontational. That moment proved an invaluable lesson. Authentic engagement hinges not on volume or aggression, but on how thoughtfully one inhabits movement and stillness. Another revelation came during a weekend hiking trip with a close friend. At a summit overlooking a vast valley, my friend pulled out a worn journal and began to write. Meanwhile, I paced the area with a newfound sense of ownership, stretching my limbs, breathing into open spaces beneath the canopy of the sky. Watching sunlight glint on distant peaks, I sensed a profound alignment between expanding my physical range and awakening inner resolve. When I finally joined him, sharing thoughts woven with the landscape's grandeur, I felt a surge of clarity unlike anything before, a lived expression of embracing both external and internal expansiveness. One particular challenge emerged when I attended a large family reunion. Naturally reserved, especially among new relatives, I caught myself curling shoulders instinctively and avoiding direct gaze. A quiet voice inside nudged me to experiment, to confidently initiate conversations, plant feet firmly during introductions, and use expressive inflections rather than apologetic quietness. The unfolding encounter surprised me. Instead of discomfort, I uncovered a growing reservoir of ease and connection. By deliberately expanding my contributions, both in speech and movement, I rewrote old patterns of hesitation into pathways for genuine engagement. The transformation felt less about changing who I was and more about revealing facets long buried beneath doubt. Now, reflect on those moments when you feel compelled to back down, whether during meetings, family events, or casual gatherings. What tiny behaviors reveal your retreat? Maybe your fingers curl into tight fists, or your breath shallows unnoticed. Consider adopting small, deliberate shifts. Uncrossing arms, placing feet sturdily, lifting your gaze to meet others with steady calm. These physical choices are not about dominance but about authentic self-expression and cultivating an energetic landscape conducive to confidence and connection. I've come to regard these embodied practices as an ongoing dialogue, a dance between restraint and assertion, quietness and expansion. They serve as reminders that our daily habits sculpt the tangible texture of our interactions, molding not only how others respond but how capable and alive we feel. Through cultivating these subtle nuances, I reclaimed a presence characterized by resilience and openness, teaching me that sometimes the grandest transformations arise from the smallest, most intentional movements. Reflecting on this journey so far, I perceive it less as a linear unfolding and more like the weaving of currents beneath a restless ocean's surface, each wave distinct yet intrinsically bound to the whole. There's a quiet alchemy occurring within us as these undercurrents of awareness and subtle physical shifts begin to merge, transforming inert patterns into dynamic forces of presence and vitality. It's as though the very architecture of our being, once rigid and contracted, starts to pulse with a newfound rhythm, inviting us to inhabit our existence with a resonance that cannot be silenced. I notice how this transformation isn't a destination but a continuum, unfolding within moments of choice, calm attention, and gentle assertion. It reminds me of autumn leaves, fragile and yet relentless in their descent, composing a rich carpet that both conceals and nurtures the earth beneath. Our gestures, breaths, and silent claims to existence accumulate like those fallen leaves, layering upon each other in ways unseen but deeply felt, gradually reshaping the contours of our interior landscape. The subtle interplay between contraction and expansion becomes an unspoken dialogue, a sacred dance that choreographs how we engage with the world and, more importantly, with ourselves. In quiet instances between conversations, I've glimpsed this dance's power. The way subtle shifts in posture precipitate shifts in emotion. How a single breath taken with intention can recalibrate tension and tiredness long held beneath the surface. These moments are not isolated or fleeting. They ripple outward, influencing the quality of every encounter, every relationship woven through daily life. There's a poetic justice in realizing that these micro-movements hold seeds of profound change, that by reclaiming dimensions of ourselves we thought beyond reach, we reweave the fabric of our lived experience. It's at this threshold that I recognize how our presence aligns with a deeper sense of belonging and worth, expressed through not just what we do but how we occupy existence itself. This embodied presence refracts through social interactions like light through shifting glass, revealing facets of identity and power often obscured by habit or fear. The dynamics at play evoke the stirring of ancient currents, silent but potent forces guiding our ability to stand firm and move freely within any circumstance. I feel the pull of these currents within myself, urging a gradual but steadfast claim to a fuller expression. There is also an intimacy in this awakening, a tenderness toward the parts of ourselves that recoiled, contracted, sought safety in invisibility. It's not a harsh reckoning but a lifting of veils, inviting us to gently shed weariness so ingrained it became a second skin. As the armor softens, the subtle movements of recalibration become acts of self-kindness, each gesture and breath a balm, restoring balance and fostering resilience. This interplay between vulnerability and courage feels like the heartbeat of transformation itself, a call to inhabit our world with grounded authenticity and quiet strength. Walking alongside these revelations, I sense a convergence, not a closing but an opening toward something expansive yet intimate. It is as if a door has cracked ajar, allowing light and air to enliven the spaces we had forgotten were ours to fill. Through this ebb and flow, I realize that our energy is neither fixed nor random. It lives in the tension between withdrawal and assertion, between holding back and stepping forward. Each choice we make, no matter how slight, is a brushstroke painting the contours of our unseen essence and the impression we leave upon life. I invite you now to lean into that place where awareness and presence intertwine, where the quiet courage of claiming your true measure stirs beneath hesitation. Notice how these subtle currents pulse within you, whether in stillness or motion, carrying whispers of strength waiting patiently to surface. There is a profound unfolding here, a soft unveiling that honors both our fragility and our capacity to rise. As we move closer to the heart of this experience, the path ahead is illuminated not by force, but by the quiet, steady light of becoming fully known, to ourselves first, and then to the world that awaits our rightful place. There was a night when I stood beneath a swollen moon, the cool air pressing softly against my skin, and I realized how much of my life had been spent tucking myself into shadows, folding systems of energy inward as if concealment could protect me from a world that often demanded more than I thought I had to give. The stifling weight of quiet retreat wasn't merely external. It threaded through my muscles, settled in the depths of my breath, and whispered an old story about shrinking away to avoid discomfort or conflict. Yet, in that moment under the immensity of sky, something shifted. I understood that the act of reserving less room around me wasn't neutral. It was a choice carrying consequences deeper than I had imagined. This recognition stirred a simmering question. What if claiming more of my existence, without apology or excess, was the truest form of self-respect I could embody? The idea felt electric, yet fragile, a fragile yet fierce invitation into uncharted territory. I started observing how subtle adjustments, lifting an elbow, releasing a stiff neck, holding a gaze steadier, began to change not only how others received me but how I experienced my own aliveness. It was as though a reservoir of untapped strength lay dormant beneath habitual patterns designed to keep me small. I tasted that strength as openness, as a quiet declaration that I belonged fully, fiercely, and without hesitation. At times, I met resistance within myself, a fear tangled with years of conditioning to concede space and dim down my energy, so I wouldn't disturb the currents around me. It was a gradual unraveling, peeling back layers of learned restraint and misunderstanding. Who am I, really, if I inhabit this world without shrinking? I asked. The answer didn't come in a flash of certainty. It emerged in moments of courage where I chose discomfort over invisibility. A bold step forward in a conversation. A conscious deepening of breath when tension threatened to collapse my posture. An open hand extended in greeting rather than a closed fist of caution. These acts transformed into threads weaving a new story. One where vitality wasn't borrowed or masked but grew from steady roots in authenticity. I also saw this unfolding reflected in those around me. Friends who rediscovered their voice not by shouting louder but by standing with grounded intention. Men who traded exhaustion for steadiness after recognizing their movement's silent dialogue with energy. Those who unlocked new avenues of connection simply by embracing the full circumference of their gestures and breathing. Their shifts weren't performances but embodied truths. Whispers made visible, resonant affirmations of belonging in a world hungry for genuine presence. It's become clear that carrying a sense of belonging isn't something granted by external validation but cultivated inwardly through the unity of intention and expression. This harmony isn't attained overnight. It's a continuous dance of inviting in fullness without losing grace, allowing expansion without forcing it. I've learned that true reclaiming happens in the quiet revolutions carried not on a battlefield but in everyday moments where we recommit to filling ourselves out with courage and dignity. In claiming what we deserve, we teach others to honor our place as well. As I hold these reflections now, I feel a steady pulse beneath doubt and hesitation. A reminder that occupying life means choosing to radiate energy in a way that feels meaningful and whole. It requires us to listen attentively to our own rhythms, to honor the signals whispered by movement and stillness alike, and to step forward in alignment with our deepest truths. This path is neither linear nor neat. It's rugged, winding, and intimately personal. But in each conscious claim to exist expansively, we draw nearer to a freedom where exhaustion fades into vitality, invisibility into recognition, and fragmentation into unity. If you hear an echo in these words, I invite you to engage with that call. Not as a demand to transform overnight, but as a compassionate conversation with yourself. Notice where hesitation gathers, where grounding feels elusive, and allow curiosity to guide small, deliberate gestures toward fuller expression. There is profound power in the simple acts of breathing deeper, standing taller, speaking clearer. They are the bridges connecting who we are to who we are becoming, quietly reshaping the unseen architecture of our lives. In the end, the journey is one of reclaiming space that was never truly ours to lose, rediscovering a steady current of energy that has always waited beneath the tides of doubt. I carry this truth with me now, as a companion, a compass, a breath of air filling the room, and I share it with you in the hope that this flame of awareness might kindle something new within your own unfolding story. We are, each of us, born to inhabit the world without apology, ready to rise and be seen in all our intricate strength.